Mr. Attwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And given your earlier comments about the length of speeches, I just want to reassure you that I do not intend to read into the record any of these documents, but I will refer to them shortly. Mr Deputy Speaker, I would be surprised, but then again, this chamber never fails to not surprise me. I would be surprised if it wasn't recognised across all the parties and all the benches in this chamber that one of our greatest strengths in Northern Ireland and in Ireland generally is our civic and community organisations, be it sporting ones, volunteers, charitable, rights-based, community-based, victims and survivors. The scale of all of that is arguably unlike any other part of these islands, and is a measure of the calibre and the capacity of people themselves to organise themselves in order to look after their own interests and seek to look after the interests of others. In my own view, Mr Deputy Speaker, the scale and capacity of civic world in this part of Ireland was one of the essential elements that during the years of conflict didn't see civil strife escalate beyond its appalling and traumatic scale. It is my own view that it was conversations by parents and grandparents, by civic leaders and within our community organisations that held the line, especially at critical points in our history when things could have escalated and deteriorated at the same time. I think that thought was what informed the architects and signatories to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, when, in recognition of the scale, capacity and contribution of the civic world, it was proposed that there would be a Civic Forum. There are many ways, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure this will be touched upon by other speakers, there are many ways in which civic society can input into our politics and governance, through the committees, through consultation exercises, through a wide range of partnerships. And that is all worthwhile and healthy if it is done in the way that it is meant to be done. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's the view of the SDLP, it was the view of this chamber earlier this year when I passed a motion in this matter. It's the view of the SDLP that giving enhanced expression and an enhanced role to civic society is something that can help our politics and help our place deal with many of the multiple issues that are all around us and that we need urgently to address. The reason why I brought these 4 documents in, Mr Deputy Speaker, without reading from them, is that, as the panel of parties knows, in the Haas-O'Sullivan process, last Friday Richard Haas and Megan O'Sullivan sent us these 4 volumes. And these are the first 4 volumes of contributions to the Haas-O'Sullivan talks from outside the talks room. And even this won't capture all of those submissions, because these are the ones that third parties and individuals have consented to share with the parties. And I think any of the panel parties and the representatives in the Haas-O'Sullivan talks process cannot but be impressed by the authority and by the wisdom and by the ambition and by the generosity that marks so many of these contributions, and not just from volunteer, sporting, charitable, rights, victims and survivor organisations, but also from countless individuals. And I think the fact that there have been 500 submissions to date to Haas-O'Sullivan demonstrates that there are people outside the talks room in the wider world who have been waiting for this moment, Mr Deputy Speaker, who have been waiting for a moment to have their say, for them to comment upon the failures and fault lines of politics, and for them to propose remedies. And it is my own view, Mr Deputy Speaker, and this might be disputed by other panel members, my own view is that the wisdom outside the talks room is certainly greater than the wisdom inside the talks room, and I think we have a lot to learn from that. But how would reconfiguring and recalling the Civic Forum now help us and help our society. And I think there are three ways that could be done. The first is to emphasise the point I just made, that the wisdom in civic society is arguably, in my view, is greater than in political society. And that if we want to shape the society in the image of the right values, with the hope and ambition, the hopes that have been dashed and the ambition that has been squandered since 1998, then the more we heed and hear the wider civic world. And that includes organisations that I would have some difference with, including marching orders on some matters. Unless we try to capture, heed and hear that wisdom, then, in my own view, our politics and this place will not prosper and live up to the hope and ambition that all of us would seek to aspire to. Secondly, as with the Good Friday Agreement, some of the thinking behind the Civic Forum was to build what was known as the inclusive society, given that in our history people felt, and rightly so, that there were the politics of exclusion when it came to this part of the world. There would be some who would argue that the politics of exclusion continues. I might differ with them in that argument, or differ in the scale of what they claim, but there are clearly people and organisations who feel that peace and politics has passed over them in the last number of years. And I think we need to learn from that without indulging bad practice and wrong approaches. We need to try to find ways and means of being more inclusive as we go further. And thirdly, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is my view that if in this building or close to this building there was a gathering of civic voices in Northern Ireland, then that in itself would be a guide to the political parties, that it would increase our capacity, and that it would be a challenge to us to achieve more than we have done. That for all the achievements, and they have been great achievements and they should never be diminished, of devolution, the New Beginning to Policing and a United Stand Against Terror, Mr Speaker, nonetheless there is great unfinished business of agreement politics, and there are people who could guide us with their wisdom and authority as we take forward the decisions and the politics that we need to over the next period of time. I think, Mr Speaker, that given what the wider civic world is saying to Haas and O'Sullivan in terms of how they want to participate in peace and politics moving forward, then I think it falls to us to listen to those voices and include them more and more in how we take peace and politics forward in this part of Ireland. There have been some voices, not very loud I have to say, who say more bureaucracy and more cost. Well, the evidence is, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the cost is very low, especially compared with some of the acute costs that fall to the people of Northern Ireland because of issues that are in dispute, not least up in Total Avenue. But the cost of not including, in my view, is something that is much greater and cannot be measured in terms of pounds and euros. The potential of inclusion, in my view, is a way to ensure that the costs of division that we see all around us at the moment do not escalate and do not embed themselves in the future of this part of the world. Mr Deputy Speaker, the SDLP motion is very explicit. It calls for the Civic Forum to be reconvened by the end of January 2014. In my view, the membership of the Civic Forum should be reconfigured because, as even Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness indicated when the review of the Forum was commenced in 2008 following restoration, society has moved on since 1998, and therefore the membership of the Forum could be reconfigured to reflect that. I don't dispute that. I would agree with that. I would have some ideas about how the Forum could be reconstructed in order to make it more representative and have a bigger and better input into our politics than heretofore. But the issue of review of its membership shouldn't delay the convening of and the recalling of the Forum now, in order to send out the message that if, on the far side of Haas, that we conspire together to build a better future, that in doing so we recognise the great authority of the civic world, and seek to more include that as we go forward.
Stephen Mutry.